A 7-year-old boy walked into a television studio one morning, and by the time he walked out, there was not a single dry eye in that building. Not in the audience, not backstage, not behind the cameras, not even on the face of the man who has spent 25 years making the entire world laugh. And that man was Steve Harvey. But before we get to that stage, before we get to that moment where Steve Harvey pressed his hand over his mouth and could not find a single word to say, you need to understand where this little boy came from. Because you cannot feel the weight of what Marcus said that day until you understand the world he was carrying on those tiny 7-year-old shoulders. You cannot understand the letter until you understand the hands that made him write it. And you cannot understand those hands until you understand his mother. So let us start there. Let us start at the very beginning. Let us start in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of a building where the elevator has been broken for 2 years and nobody has come to fix it. Let us start on a Tuesday night at 2:47 in the morning, when a woman named Diana climbed those stairs in the dark with her work shoes in her hand because she did not want the sound of her heels on the floor to wake up her son. She had just finished her second shift. She worked the morning shift at a laundry facility downtown where the machines are loud and the steam is hot and your hands are wet from the moment you walk in until the moment you leave. And then she worked the evening shift at a diner 3 blocks away where she carried plates and smiled at strangers and said, "You're welcome, and have a great night," to people who sometimes did not even look at her when they said thank you. 2 jobs, 6 days a week. And on the one day she had off, she spent it washing clothes, buying groceries, and making sure Marcus had everything he needed for school the next week. She had not slept more than 5 hours in a single night for the past 3 years. Her feet hurt every day. Her back hurt every day. Her hands, those hands that had held Marcus since the moment he came into this world, were rough and dry and cracked at the knuckles. Not because she was careless, but because she worked so hard for so long that the world had left its marks on her. And every night, no matter how tired she was, no matter how heavy her body felt, she would stop at Marcus's bedroom door. She would push it open just a little, just enough to see him. And she would look at his small face in the dark, peaceful, still, completely unaware of everything she was carrying, and she would smile. Not a sad smile, a real one. Because to her, that face was the reason. That face was the answer to every question she had ever asked herself on the hard days. That face was worth every rough hand, every sore foot, every skipped meal, every night she chose to keep going when everything inside her was screaming to stop. Marcus was worth all of it. And Marcus knew more than his mother thought he did. See, children are not blind. People forget that. People think that because a child is small, because a child is young, because a child still sleeps with a nightlight and asks for chocolate milk at dinner, people think that child does not see. But Marcus saw everything. He saw the way his mother's smile would flicker sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking. He saw the way she rubbed her hands together when she sat down, like she was trying to push the pain out of her own palms. He saw the dark circles under her eyes that she covered with a little bit of makeup every morning before she thought he woke up. He saw the way she would sometimes stand in the kitchen and stare at nothing for a few seconds, like her body was in that room, but her mind was somewhere far away, somewhere exhausted and heavy and quiet. He saw all of it, and it broke his heart in the way that only a 7-year-old heart can break, completely and quietly and without anyone knowing. Because Marcus never told his mother what he saw. He never said, "Mama, you look tired." He never said, "Mama, are you okay?" Not because he didn't care, but because he was 7 years old and he did not have the words yet. He only had feelings. Big, enormous feelings that lived in his chest and had nowhere to go. And so one night, he did the only thing that made sense to him. He got out of bed. He went to his little desk in the corner of his room. He turned on the small lamp. He opened his notebook, and he wrote a letter, not to his teacher, not to a friend, not to Santa Claus. He wrote a letter to God, because Marcus had decided that God was the only one big enough to carry what he was feeling. And that letter, that single folded piece of paper that he tucked into the pocket of his best blazer on the morning he went to meet Steve Harvey, that letter was about to change every single person in that room forever. Now, the Steve Harvey Show had seen a lot of things over the years. They had seen surprise reunions and unexpected talents and people breaking down in the most beautiful ways. The producers thought they knew what kind of moment this was going to be. They thought it was going to be a cute segment. A sweet little boy, A feel-good 5 minutes before the commercial break. They had no idea. Nobody had any idea. Steve Harvey walked out onto that stage that morning like he always does. Big energy, sharp suit, the kind of confidence that fills a room before he even opens his mouth. The audience was cheering. The lights were bright. Everything felt normal. And Steve stood at the front of that stage and looked out at the crowd and said, "All right, all right, all right. Now listen. I have been doing this show for a long time. I have sat across from presidents. I have talked to world champions. I have had the biggest celebrities in the world right here in this chair. But I need you all to understand something. What is about to happen today? I don't think any of us are ready for it. I don't think I'm ready for it. And I've seen a lot." The audience laughed. They always laugh when Steve sets something up like that. Because they trust him. They know that when Steve Harvey tells you something is coming, something is coming. "Bring him out," Steve said. "Bring little Marcus out here." And the audience turned toward the side of the stage, and there he was. 7 years old. Small for his age. Wearing a navy blue blazer that was just a little too big for him. The sleeves coming down past his wrists, but ironed perfectly. Not a single wrinkle, pressed flat, and clean like someone had spent real time on it that morning. He had on a little white shirt underneath. His shoes were polished. His hair was neat. He walked out onto that stage like he was trying very hard to be brave, and the audience melted instantly. The AWWW that went through that room was immediate and enormous. Marcus walked to the chair across from Steve Harvey and sat down, and his feet did not touch the floor. They just hung there, swinging slightly, in his polished shoes. And Steve Harvey looked at this little boy and felt something shift inside him before a single word had even been spoken. He could feel it. Something about this child was different. "Marcus," Steve said, leaning forward with his biggest smile. "Man, look at you. You look sharp, boy. Who dressed you up like this?" And Marcus looked at Steve with those serious, quiet eyes and said, "My mama ironed it this morning. She said I had to look good for you." The audience said AWWW again. Steve pressed his hand to his chest. "Your mama ironed that for you this morning?" "Yes, sir. She woke up early to do it." "Where is your mama right now, Marcus? Is she here with us today?" And Marcus paused. He looked down at his hands for just a moment. And then he looked back up and said, "She's watching. But not here." And something in the way he said it, something in that tiny pause before the words, made the room feel different. Made the air feel heavier. Steve tilted his head. "She's watching but not here," he repeated slowly. "Okay, all right." He cleared his throat. "So Marcus, I was told that you wrote something. That you wrote a letter." "Yes, sir. And I want to ask you about that letter in just a minute. But first I want to know about you. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your life. What do you like to do?" And Marcus thought about it very seriously, the way 7-year-olds do when they want to give you a real answer, not just a quick one. And then he said, "I like school. I like reading. I like math. And I like to watch my mama cook, even though she says I'm just in the way." The audience laughed softly. Steve laughed too. But he was watching Marcus very carefully now. "You like school? What's your favorite subject?" "Reading," Marcus said. "Because when you can read, you can go anywhere. My teacher told me that." "Your teacher told you that?" "Yes, sir. And I believed her." Steve nodded slowly. "Smart teacher. Smart boy." He leaned forward a little. "Now, Marcus, this letter. Tell me about this letter. Who did you write it to?" And Marcus looked at Steve Harvey with the calmest, most steady eyes and said, "I wrote it to God." Silence. Not the polite kind of silence where people are just waiting for the next thing. The real kind of silence. The kind that falls on a room like a blanket. Heavy and total. Steve Harvey did not move for 2 full seconds. "You wrote it to God," he said. Not a question, just repeating it, like he needed to hear it again to make sure. "Yes, sir." "Why God, Marcus? Why did you choose to write to God?" And Marcus looked down again at his hands. Those small, soft hands. And he said, very quietly, "Because I didn't know who else would answer." And that was the moment. That was the sentence that cracked the foundation of that room. Because there is something about a 7-year-old child looking at his own hands and saying he didn't know who else would answer. That goes straight through every wall a grown person has ever built around their heart. A woman in the second row pressed both hands over her mouth. A man in the back closed his eyes. Steve Harvey sat very still. "Okay," Steve said softly. Just that one word. "Okay," like he was steadying himself. "Marcus, would you be willing to read us that letter? Right here? Right now?" Marcus nodded. He reached into the pocket of that perfectly ironed blazer, and he pulled out a piece of paper, folded into a small, neat square. The edges worn soft, like it had been folded and unfolded many times before this moment, like he had read it to himself over and over again in the dark of his little room. He held it carefully with both hands. He unfolded it slowly. He smoothed it out on his knee. And then he looked up at Steve Harvey one more time, almost like he was asking permission. And Steve gave him the smallest nod. And Marcus looked down at his paper, and he began to read. Dear God, my name is Marcus. I am 7. I know you are very busy, but I have one question. My mama works 2 jobs. She doesn't sleep a lot. Her hands are rough. She smiles at me, but I can see when she's sad. God, did I make her life hard? Because if I did, I'm sorry. But also, can you tell her that the reason I try so hard in school is because I want her hands to rest? I want her to sleep. I want her to just sit and not worry, even for one day. I want her to know that I see her, even when she thinks I don't. I see how tired she is. I see how hard she tries. And I just want her to know that I think she is the strongest person in the whole world. And I think God made a mistake putting her with me because she deserved an easier life. But I am glad he did, because she is my mama. And I love her more than I know how to say. So God, if you could just tell her that, that would be enough. That is all I need. You don't have to give me anything else. Just let her know. Thank you, God. From Marcus. P.S. She doesn't know I wrote this. The room did not make a sound. Not one single sound. No shifting in seats. No quiet coughs. No whispered reactions. Nothing. Total silence. And then, slowly, a door on the left side of the stage opened. And Diana walked out. Marcus's mother. She had been standing behind that curtain the entire time. From the moment Marcus sat down, she had heard every word. Every single word. She was wearing a simple dress. Her hair pulled back. And her face was completely broken open. She was not crying the way people cry when they are sad. She was crying the way people cry when something inside them that has been locked up for a very long time finally gets set free. She was covering her face with both hands. Those rough, tired, cracked hands that Marcus had written about. Those hands that had built him. Those hands that had carried everything. Those hands were shaking. She walked toward her son, and every step she took felt like it was in slow motion. And Marcus looked up from his paper, and he saw her, and his face, that small, serious, brave little face, completely changed. His eyes went wide. His lip trembled, and he said, in the smallest voice, Mama, you weren't supposed to hear that. And Diana could not speak. She could not form a single word. She just walked to him and dropped to her knees right there in the middle of that stage. In front of the cameras, in front of the audience, in front of the whole world. She dropped to her knees, and she took his little face in both her hands. Those rough hands holding that soft face. And she pressed her forehead against his. And she just held him there. And Marcus wrapped his small arms around her neck. And the audience completely fell apart. There is no other way to say it. People were not just crying. They were sobbing. Openly. Without embarrassment. Without trying to hold it back. A woman in the front row had both hands pressed to her chest. A man 3 rows back was shaking his head slowly with his eyes full of tears. People who had come to that show that morning to laugh and clap and have a good time were sitting there completely undone by a 7-year-old boy and a piece of worn, folded paper. And then the camera moved to Steve Harvey. And what it found was something that people who watched that clip will never forget for the rest of their lives. Steve Harvey was sitting in his chair with his elbow on his knee and his hand pressed tightly over his mouth. His eyes were red. His shoulders were tight. And he was not saying anything. Steve Harvey, the man who fills every silence with something brilliant, the man who has a joke for every situation, the man who has hosted television for 25 years and never once been at a loss, was completely, totally, absolutely speechless. The audience watched him, waiting, giving him space. 10 seconds passed. 15. 20. And then Steve Harvey slowly stood up. And he turned to the audience. And he said, voice still rough, still full, your mama's hands are rough, Marcus, because she built you with them. Every rough spot, every crack, every callus on those hands, that is you. That is your school shoes. That is your iron blazer. That is your lunch. That is every morning she got up when her body told her to stay down. You are in those hands, boy. Every single inch of them. And Marcus looked at his mother's hands. And very gently, he took both of them in his small ones. And he held them. And Diana completely broke again. And the audience was on their feet. All of them. Standing, clapping, crying. Some people clapping and crying at the same time without even realizing it. And Steve Harvey turned to the camera with red eyes and a full heart, and he said, "I needed this today. Lord knows. I needed this today. And I have a feeling that everybody watching at home needed this too." He raised Marcus's hand in the air like a champion. And Marcus giggled. That small, shy, 7-year-old giggle. The first light moment in a long time. And somehow that little giggle made everyone cry even harder. Because it was so innocent, so pure, so completely unaware of how profoundly it had just moved the world. After the show, people talked about that moment for days. Clips were shared millions of times. Comments poured in from every corner of the world. Mothers wrote about their own children. Children wrote about their own mothers. Fathers who had never cried in public said they watched that clip 3 times in a row. Teachers shared it with their classes. Pastors showed it in churches. Someone translated the letter into 12 different languages and posted them all side by side. Because what Marcus wrote was not just one boy's letter to God. It was every child who ever watched their parent carry something heavy and wished they could lift it. It was every single person who has ever loved someone so much that they would ask God Himself to deliver the message because they did not have the words. It was every mother who has ever stood in a kitchen staring at nothing, exhausted beyond description, held together by nothing but love for a child who they pray every night is going to have a better life than they did. It was every pair of rough hands, every early morning, every skipped meal, every second shift, every flight of stairs climbed in the dark and shoes held in hand, so no one would wake up. It was all of that, in a single folded piece of paper, written by a 7-year-old boy who just wanted his mama's hands to rest. And Marcus did not ask for fame. He did not ask for attention. He did not ask for anything except for God to pass along a message to the person who meant more to him than anyone or anything in the world. But what Marcus did not know, what he could not have known when he sat at that little desk in his little room and turned on that small lamp and opened that notebook, was that his letter was never just for his mother. It was for every person who needed to be reminded that love does not always look like roses and long speeches and grand gestures. Sometimes love looks like rough hands. Sometimes love looks like ironing a blazer at 5 in the morning for a little boy who has to look good for Steve Harvey. Sometimes love looks like climbing stairs in the dark so you don't wake anyone up. Sometimes love looks like smiling when you're sad so your child feels safe. And sometimes love looks like a 7-year-old boy reaching into the pocket of his best blazer and pulling out a folded piece of paper and reading it out loud to the whole world because he just wanted his mama to know that he saw her, that he had always seen her, and that to him, she was the strongest, most extraordinary, most beautiful person on the face of this earth. And her,